What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my reaction and review of the first episode of HBO's latest Game of Thrones spin-off miniseries, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And just so you guys know, this video will contain mild spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is a fantasy drama television series created by Ira Parker and George R.R. Martin. A prequel to Game of Thrones. It is the third television series in Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire franchise and is an adaptation of the Tales of Dunk and Egg series of novellas, beginning with The Hedge Knight. It stars Peter Claffey as Sir Duncan the Tall, or Dunk, the titular Hedge Knight, and Dexter Sol Ansel as his squire, Aegon Targaryen, also known as Egg. The series premiered on January 18th of this year on HBO and will consist of 6 episodes. In November of 2025, ahead of the first season premiere, the series was renewed for a second season, which is expected to be released in 2027. And at the time of the making of this video, the series has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 64 critic reviews, with its popcorn meter currently sitting at 77% based on over 100 verified ratings. The series has a Metascore of 75 on Metacritic based on just 29 critic reviews, with a user score of 7.2 based on 20 user ratings. And finally, the series has an 8.8 out of 10 on IMDb with just over 2,000 ratings. Now, when I first heard about this show being developed, I'll admit to you guys that I wasn't particularly excited or irritated by the news, mostly because it just wasn't one of the stories of Westeros that I had any particular interest in. I always tell people, things that I'm interested in is Robert's Rebellion, for example, Aegon's Conquest, the First Long Night. Those are the things that really like pique my interest. So the Adventures of Dunk and Egg, I was like, I don't feel any type of way about that particular part of Westerosi history. And on top of that, after seeing how HBO has completely fumbled the Dance of the Dragons with House of the Dragon, I really wasn't planning to even watch this series. But I figured that the show would wind up being at least mildly popular. And judging by the numbers that have already come in, it's wildly popular. So I decided to cover it here for you guys. So here we are. Now, the first thing that I'll say here is that this show doesn't appear to take itself as seriously as the Game of Thrones shows that have preceded it, which I think is a mistake. Even House of the Dragon, even though I don't really like the changes that were made to the story, House of the Dragon at least seems to take itself seriously, and I appreciate that. I didn't at all appreciate watching Dunk, Sir Duncan the Tall, well, I guess he's not Sir Duncan the Tall yet, in this scene, but him taking a dump against the backdrop of the Game of Thrones theme, I don't know what the hell that was or why it was necessary. I found it to be overtly childish, wholly disrespectful, and completely and utterly unnecessary. And before people try to come for me about that, George R. Martin, from what I understand, when he saw the first cut of the first episode, he said the same thing, like, what the fuck is this, right? Because not only do we have to watch Sir Duncan the Tall go through the act of going number 2, they literally show him going number 2. And I'm sitting there going, what the fuck for? Why do we need to see that? And we were kind of off to a really shaky start for me in that particular moment. I also didn't really like the quick flashbacks, right? Mostly because it felt like they were used as a kind of comedic device, which I thought only added to the unseriousness that was already pervasive in this episode in like the first 10 minutes. And look, my thing is this: when I look at if you remember the quick shots of Sam when he was at the Citadel and he was cleaning out the bedpans and there was boo boo all over the place and stuff like that. That's kind of what these felt like. And I didn't even like it when they did it on Game of Thrones, even though I understood they were trying to show what Sam's everyday life was like at the Citadel, that it wasn't, what he originally thought it might be. And so I was kind of like, okay, this is really gross, but I get what they're trying to do. And here, the flashbacks are so fast that you don't really get a chance for them to really sink in. And I feel like if what the flashbacks were showing us are so important, then why aren't they longer? Especially when you have an episode with a runtime so short for an hour long. I mean, this one is only 42 minutes, I believe. And so, they probably had another 15 or 20 minutes that could have been added onto this. So we could have seen flashbacks that were much longer, that added much more context, if you ask me. But I digress. Now, despite that fact, I do think, at the very least, that the writing at large was fairly clean. Now, what do I mean by clean? It feels like they took this episode straight from the books, and which I think was the right decision in this case, given how HBO has handled other GOT adaptations, right? I think that you can't miss when you just take the writings from the book and just put them on screen. I understand there'll be some things that have to work a little bit differently logistically, because you can write about some things wherein when you try to make it into a TV show, your budget might come into play and things like that, where you go, well, we can't really do that for TV without breaking the bank. But I think that like dialogue and stuff like that, it needs to just come straight from the book. I'm like, you can't miss if you just straight from the book. Game of Thrones was at its best when they just peeled the show from George R.R. Martin's book. As soon as they got past the books in Game of Thrones, the show started going to shit. And like I said, and we won't even talk about season 8 of Game of Thrones because Dan and Dave just mailed it in. It was the most awful thing that could have happened to what was at that time my favorite show of all time. Now, I thought that the casting was pretty good here. But I mean, it's a GOT show, so I'm sure there was no shortage of actors that were absolutely dying to be a part of this series. I'm sure when you start talking about the main roles, I wouldn't be surprised if 10,000 actors were submitting for this. But I think that they got, everything right as it pertained to the actors that are portraying the roles so far in this series. I thought Daniel Ings specifically was a bright spot in this episode, in addition to Peter Claffey and Daniel Sol Anso, who I also thought were really good. And they both had a presence in this thing so far. Even though it was kind of short, you kind of felt their presence, and I think that went a long way to kind of, getting the show off on a decent footing. You know what I mean? I also thought the writers managed to both capture the budding friendship between Dunk and Egg, in addition to establishing the pair as the ultimate underdogs. And thus, we've got somewhere to go this season. That said, I can't give them too much credit because, again, all they're doing is adapting a finished book by George R.R. Martin. We all know how important it is that the book is finished, right? I guess my point is that it's hard to fail a test when you've got all the answers, even though, again, at this point, we've seen HBO do just that with the GOT shows that have come before, right? And again, I want to harp on the episode's runtime because the episode felt so short. Again, it was only 42 minutes in case you were wondering, which is a bit short for an hour long. But then again, when I looked at the episode runtimes for the other episodes that are going to come after this one, they're even shorter. They're around 30 minutes or so. And that makes one have to wonder if this series might have been better off as a movie. And if the writers may have padded this episode a bit. And, you can kind of see that in the conversation between Dunk and the girls outside Sir Lionel Baratheon's tent. It felt like that was a scene we maybe could have done without, narratively speaking, though, again, it's a scene that added to the episode's runtime, again, even though the episode fell short by about 3 or 4 minutes of what you would expect from an hour long. But again, like I said, maybe it's not supposed to be an hour long. Maybe it's supposed to be a half hour. Maybe even that's why it kind of has a more comedic tone, because half hours tend to be viewed as comedies no matter what, and hour longs tend to be viewed as dramas no matter what. But I digress. Now, overall, I'd give this episode an 80%, or an 8.0 out of 10 if you're thinking IMDb score. essentially a B for a letter grade. Now, after watching the first episode, my hope is that this series will settle into itself and make an attempt to tell us a serious story. Because I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm in no mood for a comedy of this sort. You guys remember, like I said, that Dan and Dave tried their hand at stand-up comedy in the last season of Game of Thrones, and it failed spectacularly. Everybody was a stand-up comedian in season 8. And the situation just was not funny. I mean, the Night King was coming. They still had Cersei in King's Landing. It was not a funny situation. And everybody had a tight 10, it seemed. And it just didn't work. And this show was already on thin ice with me, given the major missteps that HBO has taken with the shows that came before. And missteps I think this show has already taken. Like I said, the very beginning of this show really kind of pissed me off, if I'm being honest. And I know there are lots of GOT stans that will simply rubber stamp anything HBO puts out that happens to be Westeros related, but that's not me. Dunk and Egg are already minor characters on my list of characters from Westerosi history, so this story is going to have to be in order to keep me on the bandwagon here. But what do you guys think? Have you had a chance to check out the first episode of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms yet? If you have, what did you think of the casting of the main characters? What did you think about the show's tone? How did the episode's runtime hit you? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe to my Shorts channel and my main channel for additional content. The links are in the description. In addition to that, be sure to go and check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.